Let's take a look at some advanced factoring questions here. So in a previous video, if you watched it, I did grouping with a large polynomial, 6 or 8 terms, and we group them 2 at a time. But what happens if grouping them 2 at a time doesn't work? So for example, if I look at these first two, x cubed minus 2x squared, they have a GCF of x squared, and then I get x minus 2 left over. My next two, they have a GCF of negative x, and I'm left with 8 minus x. And my last two have a GCF of negative 2, and I'm left with x plus 4. Now, the reason grouping works is because then your parentheses all match. So if I take a look at my 3 parentheses, they don't match. So that means I can't use this method. So maybe I try grouping 3 at a time. So I'm going to take a look at these 3 pieces. They all have a GCF of x. When I take out an x, I'm left with x squared minus 2x minus 8. And if I look at my next 3, that's actually what's the parentheses down below. So they have a GCF of 1 technically. So I'm left with x squared minus 2x minus 8. So now, because my parentheses match, I've done it correctly, or I've used the correct method. Because sometimes it doesn't mean you made a mistake, it just means that that method doesn't work. So grouping 2 at a time didn't work, but grouping 3 at a time did. So that's my first parentheses, because now it's a GCF. And then what's left over, this x plus 1 goes in my second parentheses. And then you always want to check to see, can either or both of these parentheses continue to be factored? So if I look at x squared minus 2x minus 8, I'm going to set it up. It's a trinomial, 2 parentheses, an x in each. I'm going to use my sign trick. My first sign is a negative, so I'm going to bring that down. And then a negative times a negative gives me a positive. I'm looking for the factors of 8. So if you need to, write them out. And I want them to somehow combine to give me 2. Bigger number always comes first, so it's going to be 4 and 2. And then my second parentheses was x plus 1. You can't factor a linear parentheses. There's no exponent. So if my exponent is just x to the first, there's nothing else I can do. So there is your final answer for that one. Now, if we take a look at this other one I have here, this is a challenge, and only because there are multiple variables happening. But I'm going to do it the same way. I've already done this one, so I have a hint here. I'm going to tell you that the grouping 2 at a time doesn't work, but of course you could always start by doing that. So if I group them 3 at a time, my GCF is x, and I'm left with 2x squared plus 3x minus 5. And now if I look at my next 3, they can all be divided by 4 and a y. So my GCF is a 4y. And I'm just going to move this down here so that way I have more room since that other one ran a little bit over. So when I take out a 4y, I'm left with 2x squared plus 3x minus 5. And my parentheses match. So I have 2x squared plus 3x minus 5 as my first parentheses, and then I have an x plus 4y left over as my second parentheses. Now, if I take a look at my first parentheses, this is an AC. So it's a trinomial with a leading coefficient. So we do 2 times 5, which is 10. I'm going to list out my factors. I want them to somehow give me 3. So remember, I bring my outside pieces down. 2x squared minus 5. Set up 2 blank spaces using our sign trick. First sign is a positive, then a positive times a negative is a negative. So I want to split this 3x into 2 pieces using my factors of 10. So it's going to be 5 and 2. Bigger number comes first. And because I split a 3x, each of these get an x. So in my first 2, my GCF is x. And then I'm left with 2x plus 5. In my next 2, my GCF is a negative 1. I'm left with 2x plus 5. So 2x plus 5 times x minus 1. Now remember, that was only the first piece of this up here. That was my trinomial. My second parentheses is still hanging out over here. So you want to check to see, can you factor that? Well, x and y are not common, so there's no GCF still. And x and y are both to the first power, so I can't continue to factor at all. Remember, when you have a linear term or it's to the first power, that means you can't factor. So I'm going to bring this down, x plus 4y, to make it part of my answer. Because remember, if you don't use it, you just bring it down. So that original polynomial all the way back at the top, if I scroll back up, the 2x cubed plus 3x squared minus 5x plus 8x squared y plus 12xy minus 20y is factored to be my final answer that I got down here at the bottom. 2x plus 5 times x minus 1 times x plus 4.